All right. Sound advice this week is listen. Actually listen. Like it's actually listen.
Active listening.
Yeah. It's called active listening. And this is also something in Chris Voss's book, Don't Split the Difference, that I mentioned last week. Here's why. You might learn something you didn't know. You will become more liked and trusted in the process. You deliberately exclude yourself and your ego from the conversation when you just listen, and the fact that people want to be heard. So let me explain on that. I've spent a lot of time, as I'm sure you have and the viewers have, in conversation. Conversations are an inescapable part of our lives. Now, I've talked to people that like me and I like. I've talked to people that don't like me and I don't like. And I've talked to people who feel nothing towards me and I them. And the one thing I've been able to detect over the years pretty well is whether or not the person or people I'm talking to are actually listening to me in the conversation, or whether they're bored or have a different agenda than coming to a conclusion together, or if they're just waiting for the next time to talk. You know how you have those conversations of people are just waiting for the next chance to talk? They're not listening to you. They're just loading their guns while
they're going through in their head.
Yeah.
What I'm about to say. What I'm about.
Their mind's full and it can't take anything else. So if you have a different agenda in a conversation that doesn't depend on what the other person is saying, you can go into the conversation and exit the conversation having affected nothing and learned nothing. And that's really interesting. Like it's possible to have a conversation with someone and learn nothing and affect nothing. And it's like when you understand that, like, a lot of conversations can be like that, it becomes like, for me at least, that's a daunting idea. The fact that I can have an interaction with someone, like you and me, can have a conversation and we learn nothing from each other.
Yeah.
That's absurd.
Yeah.
Like, why would you do that? So, also not listening leads to miscommunication, misunderstanding, and maybe even conflict or violence. And I found that in my work. So how do we avoid that? Well, we avoid that by listening. And I don't mean that you just hear them. I mean, you listen as a verb. You listen to them. Now, how are those two things different? Hearing means you register audio input into the brain and move forward with whatever the fuck you were going to do anyway, because our plan is more important than the other person's plan. But listening means we put a mental catcher's mitt on and get ready for the fact that someone is about to throw things at us that we may not understand. Listening means that when someone says something, we catch it. We think about it and we assess how important it is to them and to us, and where we both want to get to. It means that we make a judgment on what they're saying, and if it's important to us or them, we remember it. So, like, if we're having a conversation, right, and you say something to me, I'm trying to catch that, have a look at it, and decide whether it's important to you or me. Because if it's important to you, it needs to be important to me. Like, if it's important to you, then I need to understand that it is important to you, and I need to understand why it's important to you. Listening means that you don't skirt over the details. It means that you catch the details and you put them together. So here's a few tips on why you should listen. Number one, listen because you might just learn something you didn't know. Most conversations are ones in which we have an agenda to move through our day, and most of them are mundane, uneventful, and unforgetful. Things like hellos, good mornings, purchasing things, dealing with co-workers and customers, your boss or your students. Even in these conversations, you need to listen because you might just learn something you didn't know about the way your bank works, about why something is so expensive, about the way your loved ones wake up in the morning, about what's really troubling them, about how your students are going, about why your mum is actually angry, or about what your dad is trying to teach you. And then, in the really important conversations, you need to listen even more and practice in the mundane conversations. Because if you do listen even more in those really important conversations, if you just close your mouth and ignore the desire to interrupt, to input, to stake your place in the conversation, to let your ego get involved, which I'm guilty of all the time, if you just listen, the person you're in conversation with will open up the floodgates of information, all kinds of information, emotional, historical, biographical, logistical, intellectual, and secret information. People, if you just and this is for young men as well, because young men have a habit of I just want to piss in the soup. I just want to put my stain all over this conversation, and especially with young women. Like when young blokes talk to young women, they want themselves to be impressed upon the young woman, for the young woman to be like, oh, I'm so impressed with this guy. I'll tell you what impresses young women. Shut the fuck up and listen to them. That'll impress a young woman.
Put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah. Exactly, and use empathy to try to understand where they're coming from. Now, here's the really interesting point, right? It's that you don't have to understand what they're saying. You just have to listen. You don't have to understand. Don't feel the pressure to understand and answer back. That's a problem. You just have to listen. And then if you listen to someone for long enough, you will understand. And here's what you will eventually understand. Whether they're right or wrong, whether they're real or fake, whether they're lying or telling the truth, whether they're mature or immature, whether they're malevolent or benevolent, get a dictionary if you don't know what those mean, and so much more. You will learn so much about a person and about your own world with their minute from just one conversation of just listening. If you can just listen. You see that? That's silence. That's okay. It's okay to have silence. You just be comfortable with silence, and it's okay. This gets to my next point. Listen because people want to be heard. If you listen to someone even when you don't want to, even when you want to interrupt, even when they're wrong, you'll be doing both of you a favor. You're doing you a favor because you'll get to learn what's in their head, their heart, and in their motivations. And you'll be doing them a favor because what people need more than anything, and especially these days now that we're all so lonely, is someone to talk to, someone to listen, someone to take them and their concerns seriously and genuinely. And this is so important for men to understand about being in a relationship with women. A woman doesn't need you to understand. I need to make that very clear. Women don't need men to understand. They just need you to listen. And the reason that is the case is because you cannot guarantee that you will understand. And she doesn't, if she's a good person, she cannot expect you to understand, and she does not. But a lot of men get frustrated because they try to put the subject of the conversation into their lens and they make it their thing so that they can project the image of understanding and empathy and sympathy and that they, oh no, I understand. You don't, and that's okay. A woman doesn't need you to understand because you can't always guarantee it. She needs you to listen because that's something you can promise. You can promise to just be like, okay, I'll shut up and just listen. But you can't promise that you're going to understand. With a lot of young women I've talked to, the number one issue for them is communication because they need it. They don't just want it, they need it. Now, men need it too, but men need communication mostly, I find, at least in my experience, to understand the goal. Women need it to understand themselves and you and the goal and the man or woman that they're with. Men are like, and this is going to sound really gendered, right? It's going to sound really like, oh, men are this way, women are this way. Not at all. Everyone's different. But just generally, like I can sit in a room with you and we're both playing PC and we don't talk for 3 hours, and that's okay. I could sit in a room with you and we just don't talk, and there's nothing's going on. We're just silent, all right? But a lot of people get nervous and they want to fill the silence. Don't try to fill the silence. I remember a minister when I was in church at about 10 years old preaching to the men and saying that men should listen more to their wives. And then I went home and asked Mum if that was true. And she just laughed out loud. She's like, of course it's true. And every woman I've met so far has said the same bloody thing. Now, just on dates, a lot of men get in trouble on dates with women because women are naturally great at communication. Women are fantastic at communication. If you want to learn how to communicate, watch women. And what you'll see is that women listen really, really well, right? If you're on a date with a girl and she's just listening to you talk without replying, shut the fuck up. Because here's what she's doing. She's studying you. She's learning about you. She's trying to understand you. She's figuring you out. She's figuring out who you are, what you believe, how you see your mother, what's your family like, how deep your friendships are, how loyal you are, how your exes feel about you. Because we just have a tendency to just we just fucking vomit that shit out because we're nervous and we want to impress her. Now, and like, because we're nervous and we want to impress chicks, they don't know that women aren't impressed the way that men are impressed. Men are impressed by bragging and being loud and confident sometimes, or the proof of that bragging, quoting stats about their wealth and knowledge, their achievements and medals and positions. Women are just impressed by listening. And I think that, so, you know, maybe this advice is for young men. Again, because I'm not going to tell women what to do, because I've learned that's a bad idea. Just listen. Just learn how to listen. Like, really listen. And look, I'm not the best at it, but I try to do it every day. Like, when I'm in a conversation with someone and they're just like, I have to get a mop to clean up the shit that they're drooling. I'm like, okay, hold on. Just listen, because you might find out something that you didn't know. And that happens so often.
I think
go.
it's called active listening because you have to be actively listening.
Yes.
You have to be conscious of listening.
Yeah.
It's just hearing when you're just standing there and hearing what they're having to say. But actively listening means you're actively thinking about what they're saying, or you're actively listening to what they have to say.
You're engaged in the listening. Yeah.
You're not sitting there thinking about the next sentence you're going to say. You're there thinking about what they're saying to you.
Yep.
Which
Exactly.
can make a big difference.
So that's my sound advice this week. Listen. There you go.
Listen to our podcast
every
Monday.
Yeah. Oh, and we're now on iTunes, which is fucking awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Hit us up on iTunes, Spreaker, all the etceteras.
So, if you go to iTunes and check out the actual fuck, you'll find us there too.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You can listen to us on iTunes.
Fucking oath. You got anything else, man?
No, that's really good. I again, spot on with that sound advice. I couldn't agree more.
Thanks,
absolutely. Man. Active listening is one of the biggest things. It's one of the, especially with social media, especially with the world we live in right now, it's extremely easy to disengage. It's extremely easy to not listen.
Yeah.
If someone's telling you something at work you've already heard before, it's extremely easy. Yeah, whatever. I read that on Facebook, or I saw it on Reddit, or whatever. Social media these days make it really hard to listen because you don't have to. You can learn everything from whatever, any source. So, but actively listening to someone and their problems can really change. Again, people want to be heard. You can change someone's day just by listening to them for 5 seconds.
Fucking oath, man.
Just by hearing what they have to say. That you can change their day. They can go home and they'll feel so much better about it. They just got out what they wanted to say and someone actually heard it.
And you'll change their day too. You'll change your day too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think the big difference on the sound advice is the difference between hearing and actively listening. And we urge you all to actively listen
to our podcast.
And
get on YouTube as well. All right, we good?
We're good.
We're done.